Jason Statham wasn't expecting to become a real-life hero that day. After months of intense filming in Arizona, choreographed fights, late-night shoots, and endless media appearances, he craved silence. So, instead of boarding a plane back to Hollywood, he chose solitude. He hopped on his custom-built motorbike and rode into the vast, unforgiving beauty of the Sonoran Desert. With no cameras rolling, no scripts to follow, and no spotlight, Jason was simply a man chasing peace in nature's rawest landscape. The desert air was dry and still, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun began to set. Towering cacti and rugged cliffs lined the empty trail. It was a kind of setting that would inspire a film scene, until it became something much more real. As he slowed down to take in the view, helmet off and resting in the crook of his arm, something odd disrupted the silence. A sound, faint, distant, and filled with emotion. He paused, listened. Was it the wind? A trick of the landscape? Then it came again, clearer this time. A cry, not from an animal, but unmistakably human. Small, weak, possibly from a child. Jason's entire demeanor changed. He scanned the horizon, no roads, no signs of life, just dust and dunes. But his instincts told him something or someone was out there, and they were in trouble. Without a second thought, he left his bike, grabbed his water flask, and began moving toward the sound, navigating the uneven terrain, loose rocks beneath his boots. He stayed focused, ears tuned to cries that seemed to drift in and out with the wind. For most people, the noise might have been easy to dismiss, but not for Jason. He followed the call deeper into the desert, pushing past brush and rock. Every step raised questions. What if it was a trap? What if it was nothing? But he couldn't walk away. After nearly 15 minutes of hiking, he heard again, louder, more urgent. That's when he saw her. Tucked into a rocky crevice just off a narrow ridge was a little girl, no older than 10, barely conscious, her skin red from the sun, lips cracked from dehydration. She looked up at him, eyes blinking slowly, and whispered one word, "Help." Jason knelt beside her, giving her small sips of water and offering quiet reassurance. She clutched his arm with all the strength she had left. In that moment, he didn't know who she was, how she'd ended up there, or how far they were from safety. But what he did know was that he wasn't leaving her behind. A quiet ride to the desert had become a life-or-death mission, and what happened next would take everything he had, his strength, his focus, and his heart. If this story has you hooked already, go ahead and hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The sun dipped lower behind the desert ridge, casting long shadows across the sand as Jason Statham tightened the straps on his backpack and gently lifted the frail girl into his arms. Her body was light, worryingly so, barely more than a whisper weight. She rested her head against his shoulder, exhausted beyond words. With no cell signal, no marked path, and fading light, Jason knew this rescue would push him to the limits. But backing down wasn't in his nature. Every stunt, every fight scene, every hardship he'd ever faced had trained him for moments like this. Asterisk, asterisk, not in front of cameras, but in the real world, when someone needed saving, asterisk, asterisk. The desert was a cruel place. The heat radiated from the earth even as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Jason moved swiftly but cautiously, retracing his steps through dry brush and unstable rock. He kept his eyes sharp for familiar landmarks, the sun-bleached boulder that looked like a lion's head, the twisted saguaro cactus with missing arm, asterisk, asterisk, anything to guide him back to his bike, asterisk, asterisk. The girl stirred now and then, muttering unintelligibly. He offered her small sips of water, careful not to overwhelm her weakened system. Every minute counted, and he felt the weight of it in every footstep. At one point, a loose rock gave way beneath him, and he stumbled hard. The girl cried out weakly, and Jason shielded her with his body as they hit the ground. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up, checking her for injury before continuing. His shoulder ached from the fall, his breath coming in short bursts, but he refused to slow down. The desert didn't care that he was a movie star. Out here, there were no stunt doubles, no second takes, only survival. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into heartbeats, Jason saw it. the glint of chrome from his motorcycle's handlebars catching the last rays of sunlight. Relief surged through him, but he didn't let it distract him. Carefully, he settled the girl against the seat and strapped her in securely. With a final glance toward the horizon, he revved the engine and sped off toward the nearest ranger station, miles away, but their only hope. The ride was bumpy and rough, the desert road punishing his every move. But Jason pushed through. Every twist of the throttle, every jolt over a rock was a gamble. But he couldn't stop. The little girl's life hung in the balance. He glanced down at her once. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but she was still with him, and that was enough to keep him going. The roar of Jason Statham's motorcycle echoed across the empty desert highway as he closed in on the nearest ranger station, dust trailing behind him like a comet's tail. The little girl was slumped against him, cradled in the curve of his arm, her small body weak but still breathing. Every mile felt like a victory and a race against time. Jason didn't know how long she'd been out there. He didn't know her name, where she came from, or how she had ended up alone in the desert. But what he did know was this. She was a fighter, and he wasn't going to let her down. When he arrived at the ranger outpost, the scene unfolded in a blur. Medics rushed from the building the moment they heard the engine. Jason carefully handed the girl over, explaining what had happened as professionals began to assess her condition. Dehydration, heat stroke, exhaustion. The prognosis was serious, but there was hope, thanks to how quickly Jason had acted. As they loaded her into an ambulance for transport to the regional hospital, one of the rangers turned to him and asked, "Where did you even find her?" Jason replied simply, "I heard her cry." Inside the ranger station, Jason sat down for the first time in hours. A medic brought him water and insisted he be checked out as well. His hands were scraped. His shoulder throbbed from the earlier fall, but he waved them off. "She's the one who needs care," he said. And then, quietly, "I just wish I'd found her sooner." The rangers and EMTs looked at him in disbelief. Most people wouldn't have heard a child's cry in the middle of nowhere, let alone gone searching for its source. But Jason wasn't most people. Later that evening, at the hospital, the little girl's identity was finally uncovered. Her name was Sophia, just 9 years old. The doctor said she was lucky. Another few hours, and she may not have survived. As Jason sat nearby, listening to fragmented stories shared by investigators, the truth began to surface. Sophia had been part of a group attempting an illegal border crossing in a van, somewhere in the remote desert. The vehicle crashed during the night. In the chaos that followed, everyone scattered. Sophia was left behind, unnoticed, abandoned. The realization hit Jason hard. This little girl had been lost in one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Asterisk, asterisk, 4 days, asterisk, asterisk. Search efforts had been launched, but eventually scaled back. With no leads and no signs of life, authorities had quietly assumed the worst. And then, by sheer coincidence, Jason happened to be riding through that very stretch of desert, heard a sound most would have missed, and chose to act. It wasn't luck. It was instinct and heart. Jason Statham stood in the sterile hallway of the small Arizona hospital, hands still dusted with desert sand, his shirt stained with sweat and grit. Behind the door, Sophia lay asleep, stable now, thanks to fluids, care, and the sheer force of will that had gotten her here. But Jason couldn't shake the image of her, alone in the heat, abandoned in a wasteland where no child should ever be. He had heard her cry at the very edge of his consciousness, a sound that most would have ignored or dismissed. But not him, not ever. Asterisk, asterisk, and now, standing in the quiet hum of medical machines, he knew her rescue was only the beginning. A detective arrived shortly after, joining the hospital staff and immigration officers who were already piecing together the mystery. From what they gathered, Sophia had come across the border with a small group in the back of a van, an unmarked, unsafe vehicle used by smugglers. Somewhere in the vast desert, the van had lost control and flipped. Witnesses were scarce. No one had filed reports. The rest of the group, fearful of being caught, had either fled or been picked up. But Sophia, she had been left behind. Forgotten. Asterisk, asterisk. Jason's jaw clenched at the thought. It didn't matter where someone came from or what circumstances brought them here. Asterisk, asterisk. No child deserved that kind of fear and abandonment, asterisk, asterisk. He listened closely as the officers discussed protocol, the likelihood of tracing the group, the red tape involved in her case. But the truth hung heavy in the air. If Jason hadn't been riding to the desert that day, if he hadn't stopped, Sophia might never have been found. It was a chilling thought that wouldn't leave him. Later that night, Jason returned to the hospital room. Sophia stirred when she saw him, her eyes wide and still unsure. He smiled gently and pulled a chair beside her bed. "You're safe now," he told her, voice low and steady. She nodded, gripping his hand tightly with her tiny fingers. It was the first time he saw her smile. Fragile, but real. The hospital staff was amazed by how calm and present Jason was. Not because he was a celebrity, but because he stayed. Most people would have dropped her off and disappeared. But Jason checked in on her every few hours, brought her food when she was ready to eat, and even read to her when she couldn't sleep. He was more than her rescuer. He became her protector. Outside the hospital, the story was already spreading. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets. Soon, the headlines blazed across social media. Right arrow, asterisk, Jason Statham saves lost child in the desert. Asterisk, right arrow, asterisk, real-life hero. Actor rescues girl left behind in border tragedy. Asterisk, right arrow, asterisk, action stars instinct save a life. In the middle of nowhere. Asterisk. Jason, however, stayed quiet. He declined interviews. Not because he didn't care, but because this wasn't about publicity. "It's about a little girl who should never have been in that situation," he said when one reporter caught him outside the hospital. "And if I hadn't been there, who would have been?" Jason Statham sat quietly in the hospital's family room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. It had been 3 days since he found Sophia in the desert, and in that short time, the bond between them had become unexpectedly powerful. She clung to him, not out of starstruck awe, but from the simple fact that he had been there when no one else was. She didn't talk much, but her eyes said what her voice couldn't. "Thank you. Don't leave me." And Jason hadn't. He showed up every morning, stayed past visiting hours, and made sure she never felt alone again. But nothing could prepare him for what the doctors and investigators revealed next. That morning, after a routine scan to monitor her dehydration and exposure symptoms, doctors discovered something concerning. Scarring on Sophia's ribs, bruising patterns, evidence of long-term neglect. Jason's heart sank. They weren't just looking at a case of abandonment in the desert. They were unraveling a life of pain that stretched far beyond those few days alone. The child services counselor assigned to Sophia's case sat across from Jason, her voice gentle but firm. "We believe Sophia may have been trafficked. There are signs, physical and emotional." Jason's fingers curled tightly around the coffee cup. "She's only 9, he said quietly. "How can anyone do that to a child?" The counselor explained that Sophia was originally from a small village across the border. Her mother had died years ago. Her father? Gone. She'd been passed between relatives and strangers, none of whom had offered the kind of care a child needs. Somewhere along the line, she'd been picked up by a smuggling group, not just across the border, but possibly for darker purposes. No one knew exactly who had been in that van when it crashed. Some had been arrested, some vanished into the desert, and others, it seemed, didn't want to be found. But the terrifying truth was this. Sophia had been disposable to them. Jason didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet but fierce. "She deserves better. She deserves a chance." And so he made a decision. Later that day, after consulting with legal advisors, he met with the hospital's legal liaison and child welfare reps. "What would it take," he asked, "for me to take care of her?" The room went silent. "I'm not saying adoption overnight," he clarified. "But if she doesn't have family, I can help. I want to help." They explained the process was complicated. Paperwork, international laws, court proceedings. But Jason didn't flinch. "Then let's start." Sophia, unaware of the meeting, was watching cartoons in her room. When Jason returned, She looked up and smiled, small but genuine. He sat beside her, offering a juice box he'd grabbed from the vending machine. "You like strawberry?" he asked. She nodded. "Good, 'cause I got two." As they sat side by side in silence, sipping juice and watching the screen, Sophia leaned her head gently against his arm. And in that moment, no cameras rolling, no headlines buzzing, just the soft hum of cartoons and a child's quiet trust, Jason knew this was the most important role he'd ever play. Weeks passed. The story of Sophia's rescue had gone viral, spreading across the world like wildfire. News outlets praised Jason Statham not for his box office hits, but for something far more powerful: his humanity. Fans flooded his social media with messages of support and admiration, calling him a real-life hero. But Jason remained silent online, focused entirely on something more important: Asterisk healing a life that had been nearly lost star. Sophia was still in a hospital, but her health was improving by the day. Her eyes were brighter. Her laugh, once silent, now surfaced in small bursts. But it wasn't just the medical care. It was the consistency. Jason had shown up for her every day. No cameras, no red carpets, just coloring books, bedside jokes, and quiet reassurances whispered when the nightmares returned. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Jason had already started the legal process to become her legal guardian. He knew it would take time, that the system was slow and filled with hurdles, but he was ready for it. He wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't trying to save someone for show. He simply couldn't walk away from a little girl who had already lost everything and still fought to survive. And then came the moment that broke him wide open. One evening, as he was leaving the hospital room after reading her a bedtime story, Sophia tugged his sleeve. "Jason," she said softly. He turned, kneeling beside her. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated, eyes wide and hopeful. "Can I call you Dad?" Time froze. Jason blinked hard. For all the scenes he'd acted in, the emotions he portrayed, nothing had ever prepared him for this. He smiled, eyes glassy, and nodded. "Yeah, I'd really like that." From that night forward, something shifted. Jason had always been strong, but now he was anchored. Every spare moment between shoots, training, or travel, he spent with Sophia. They walked through parks, built Lego castles, ate too much ice cream, and gradually the trauma faded. The little girl who had cried in the desert was now thriving in the light. Eventually, he released a quiet statement, not to press, but to his followers online. A photo of Sophia's hand in his, and just one sentence. Asterisk, sometimes the greatest roles aren't written in scripts. They find you when you least expect them. Asterisk,